me.
Welcome to the Senior Rehab Podcast,
the podcast for rehab clinicians that want to better serve older adults.
And now, your host, Dustin Jones.
Christine Cabral, welcome to the Senior Rehab Podcast. Thank you for your time this evening.
Hi, Dustin.
I'm excited to talk with you. We've been interacting a bunch on the Facebook group, and you've just been awesome in that group. I want to thank you publicly for helping me out with the letting people in and some of the admin type stuff, but then just caring about your patients and sharing some of your stories and just your drive for what you do. So thank you for that.
Thank you. It was a very needed resource for me. As you know, in home care, you're definitely in your own silo. And so I was at the time looking for a podcast because I think it's a great combination of you're always in your car anyway. Mm-hmm. And it just, I just found it and have run with it.
Yeah, that's cool. So give us a background just kind of on your career. What have you been up to in terms of rehab up to this point?
So I'm a career changer. I have had many jobs in many different fields.
Awesome.
It probably changed for me in about 2009. I was in a retail manager job that I knew I was getting pretty bored at and needed to switch. My uncle was working with the visiting nurses of Rhode Island, and we had dinner, and he had talked about, why don't you become a CODA? And I said, what's a CODA? I had no idea about rehab or anything about physical therapy or anything. That was just kind of the beginning of a journey that started with me trying to figure out if I wanted to do occupational therapy or physical therapy, and just kind of learning about the field through the community college down here. And it's in Newport, Rhode Island.
Okay. So retail, what type of retail were you in?
I was in a store that catered to teachers and to parents of young children.
Okay. All right. I'm sure I'm going to dig out some questions from that experience as we progress. All right. So what were some of your biggest surprises in school?
Well, so when I decided I went into school just really not knowing anything about the field. Mm-hmm. So I did the introduction to occupational therapy assistant and the introduction to physical therapy assistant as I was doing my prereqs. And basically I decided to go into physical therapy based on the program, really. It was just knowing that there was 3 amazing physical therapists who had been in the field for over 30 years, who I really wanted to spend the next 2, really 3 years with all the different, prereqs I needed to get. That's who I wanted to spend my time with and learn from. So that's really what, it wasn't a surprise as much as it was just a journey of just wanting to be around people who I wanted to learn from.
Okay. So with that being the goal and the desire, once you're out, you're practicing, has that desire been met, do you feel like, in terms of being around people that you can learn from once you're out and practicing?
I think it's different. I think when you're in school, and so you're kind of always, it's almost too much, right? You're always learning and you're always in these test cases. And one thing that was different for me was the practicums. I had never in my prior schooling needed to perform, I guess maybe in presentations, but not to that level. But yet it was a fake case. So that was always weird to me, to try to have people watch me as I was trying to, work with someone. When I get out into the field, especially for home care, of course, you run into the thing of they don't want to hire you right out of school. I did find one home care agency that would hire me per diem, so I kind of always did home care right from the start, but I actually started, my first job was in a school. But even in the school, quite honestly, I was very much by myself. I was actually more by myself in the school system than I was when I started with visiting nurses.
Yeah. My gosh. Yeah, that's the nature of your first job, and the job that you have now and I have as well is very isolated, which makes me thankful for the internet and Facebook groups and things like that to help, like you mentioned before.
Yeah.
I would want you though to walk us through PTA school, because we, in my school, we learned about the education, the process, and I remember some of it, but honestly, I don't feel like it was hit on that much. And I feel like a lot of my PT colleagues are not too aware of the training of what you all go through, to be able to work with patients. So could you kind of give us a rundown on what you went through before you took that first job in the school system?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that I'll say is I have a bachelor's from early in my life, and I worked twice as hard for my associates than I ever did for my bachelor's.
Yeah.
I know that there's talk with the APTA about, whether the PTA should be an associate's or a bachelor's. And I know, especially for us at the community college, we were working, I feel like we were trying to fit in 4 years into 2 years. I never worked harder. I was always trying to, to learn. It was just a constant struggle. We all felt it. And so you can see where it's kind of busting out of the seams at this point. Community, the CCRI was is a really good school. And you don't quite really understand that until you go out into the field and maybe even into your clinicals, and you start to see how much more you're prepared. So, if you're looking for a good curriculum, I definitely think that, Kim and her program is one of the best. And she's actually, very on the boards of the APTA and has been very involved. But, you start with your basics of anatomy. Again, for someone like me, I didn't even know what the body was composed of. I didn't know anything. It was just really just starting from muscles and bones and what is this that we're even made of. So you start with the basics. The gatekeeper class for physical therapy, at least assistants, at least for our school, was kinesiology. We just had a teacher who, she knew everything, and she would not let up on making sure you knew everything. But it was a class that you had a lot of people that were, you were either making it or not. To get into the program, you had to have A's in all your prereqs, just because it was that competitive.
Gosh.
And then you start moving into, once you finally get into the program, you start moving into the modalities, the basics. So you start with PTA 1, that's all about mobility and, assistive devices. And my teacher was very much into wound care. So I think I got a broader sense of that than maybe some others did. Then you move into cardio, and you move into thorax, and and then your clinicals start happening too. So there's a lot going on
in a very short period of time.
In a very short period of time. That's right.
Gosh. So what do you learn about physical therapists in that program? What did they say about our education, or just what was the perception of the physical therapy education then?
That's a very interesting question. I haven't really thought too much about, but there wasn't much, I'll be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, we were very much in our own, like I said, when you have a program that's just that intense and you're just trying to keep up, you're not really thinking about PTs and what PTs are doing. Maybe we did go to URI, which is kind of the PT school that's here, to see, what the school looked like, that kind of thing. We went to the lab, and we kind of just knew that we were going to work for them, with them. And I think sometimes the teachers would talk about there were different styles that PTs expectations they would have. So, but if you're talking like 100% of the program, I'm going to go with like 2 to 5% where we really thought about how we were going to go out and work with a PT.
Mm-hmm.
Being honest. Yeah. And that was just my experience. I don't know what everybody else kind of goes through.
Yeah, I would agree with that in terms of what I remember. Because I know there's only so much time that you have to go over so many of the different topics in PTA school and PT school. But I think for me, one of the most eye-opening things was not having a great perception of what people like you have gone through and what you can or cannot do in the clinic. And then I went into an outpatient orthopedic clinic where, the PT PTA team, is huge. I mean, depending on the clinic, but I mean, my gosh, you're spending so much time with that person, communicating back and forth, talking over patients and all that. And I guess I didn't have that much experience with that through my clinicals and in school. And it was just very eye-opening to me. I was very unprepared for sure. Yeah. And I made a lot of mistakes and a lot of regrets in how I handled that relationship too. So I am curious, how were your PTA PT relationships in the jobs that you've had? And you can be general, but just
I'll stay with the home care.
Okay, that's good.
So right now, I work with the visiting nurses. We're basically on an island, Newport, Rhode Island. And so most people know most people and they want to stay on the island, and we kind of do our thing. I'll just be honest. It's beautiful here. So, it's nice to work around here. Yeah. And I would say that for me, home care is such like it happens and it's quick, right? The person comes out of the hospital, they're they're admitted, and we need to find PTs and PTAs to kind of meet all the needs. And so while it would be nice, I think they're trying to get to this place of matching PTAs to certain PTs. It's just not happening. I think they want me to have like 3, and I probably have about 6. So it just, it's, would it be ideal? Yes. Do I think it's going to happen? I can't see with the way that we do it right now that that's really going to happen. So it takes time to know who the PTs are and what they expect from you. Yeah. And both how you communicate and also what they expect you actually to do.
Yeah. And I imagine that's a challenge, an increasing challenge in home health as we have the technology now to where we can communicate without even having to talk to one another. It's just, I push a plan of care or, shoot a text message or whatever it may be, to where I'm not forced per se to have that, face-to-face interaction with a PTA colleague, which I'm now aware of it. At first I wasn't. I did not try and establish those open lines of communication, really, communicating well with the PTA that I was working with. But now I'm a little more cognizant of it. But that makes me think, so if you were to talk to, like, say, a new home health PT, what advice would you give them to make sure that they just establish those lines of communication well and set, clear expectations and make sure that you all are a functioning, healthy team rather than, just some, person on the computer screen that you're handing your patients off to, which is commonly the case.
It is commonly the case. I would say, clear goals are very helpful to PTAs, short-term, long-term. And that's probably where you're going to start the conversation. I use many different forms of communication. I have some PTs that text. I have some that email. I have some that leave me voicemail. To me, I just think that's the world we live in right now. So I don't really, and I use them all, so I don't really mind whichever way. Usually what I do is on a weekly basis, I give them an update, and it's usually based upon the goals. That seems to be the best, tactic. And what will happen is you just have that range. You have the PTs that I'll never hear from. right? I just, I leave it for them, and they may never talk to me, and that's fine. And then I'll have some that every visit, they want to know very specifically what happened. They'll have very specific follow-up. They'll have, you just run that gambit, and you just kind of know based on the person that this is, their expectation, and you kind of just run with it.
Yeah. I know this depends on the person, but let's say for you, can a PT over communicate with you?
Not usually.
Yeah.
Not usually. I mean, and you have to remember the other thing is that I'm always going to see them on the 4th week. We have the certification period. So I'm always seeing them. So even though I know we talk about the silos or being by myself, every week I usually have at least 2 to 3 visits that I'm doing as a PTA supervision visit. Mm-hmm. So as much as I do think that I'm in my silo and going to my patients, I'm almost always with a PT at some point, figuring out and doing the supervision. So I don't think it's exactly what people say where you're never with someone. I actually think I'm with someone a good amount of the time.
Yeah. Here's another thing that I think about. So I'm 5 years out of school. I've worked. There's a couple PTAs that I've worked a good bit with, and they, I'm not going to name names, but there's a big age difference. One of them, their child is the same age as I am. Yeah. And, they've been doing this for years. And that is very intimidating for me as a new physical therapist, regardless of the education that I received. I struggle with that because I'm, I come out, I've got this doctor of physical therapy education. I think I have everything figured out, which I don't, which I often learn the hard way. And then I'm working with this PTA that's, been treating patients for 20 some years that is absolutely amazing at what they do, that honestly, I learn more from them than what they learn from me. And I struggle with that in that role. Have you experienced that before where have you worked with any new grad PTs?
I don't really worry about age. I think that there are separate roles, and no matter what your age is, Dustin, you are the PT, and the PT is the person who does the assessments, the evaluations, and set up the goals. So to me, there is that separation of things that we do, and it doesn't matter that you're younger than the other person because a PTA is never doing that. They're progressing based on whatever you have as the goal for the person. It's your license, so I think that it's that age to me, or even experience, I don't worry about that. I think that I'm a career changer, so I'm even though I have less experience, I am older than a recent community college grad. So yeah, I guess for me, I kind of feel like I don't want to be judged or think about age very much with who I'm working with. It's like we are focused on the patient and let's figure out what's the best for the patient. Because quite honestly, that's complicated enough. To bring in age on top of it, I just don't think you're going to get anywhere.
That was so ageist of me, wasn't it?
I know. I'm not saying it's ageist. I just think that I'm just not worried about it.
I think it was after you mentioned it, because I do put so much based on age and years of experience, and that is not a healthy thing for me to do. That was very refreshing. I really appreciate you just sharing that, because I know that I've talked to several people where they've had a similar situation, and when they get out in the work field and working with different people on the healthcare team. I want to get to, since we're going on this PT-PTA relationship, home health track, I want to get to some listener questions. So or you've interacted with a couple of these people. Jamie Lowy, who is pretty awesome, in the Facebook group, did an episode with him as well. He asked, what's changed over the years with regards to how you think PTAs have been valued by our profession and professional association? What do you think about that?
That's a little hard for me to answer because I've only been in the field for a couple of years. So I'm not sure exactly how it's changed. I think that moving forward, I do think it will be interesting to see what happens if, they do start moving into more education for PTAs and what that will mean. I think there's always that piece of dividing the work when PTs are trying to decide if they're keeping a patient or passing on a patient. I think there's some manager things that, we have 2 wonderful managers at Visiting Nurses who work on those things with PTs, and I'm not even part of that, but I think it helps kind of that flow. I think it's kind of a crucial role to make sure that the work is flowing from the PT to the PTAs and what that means and how do you supervise and those types of things. Because I'm not sure if in school you kind of have that piece and then you all of a sudden, you have PTs that are trying to supervise PTAs and pass on patients, and it can get very confusing and overwhelming, I think, for PTs.
Yeah.
So I think
I would agree.
Clear, right. And so so what happens is I think for when a PT comes into the house, because you got to remember what I know is that sometimes the admitting PT is not the PT that's my supervisor. And so what I end up doing is just understanding that PT may not have not met this person. And so I basically present, sometimes I call, it's like I present my student to my the teacher. I present where the person is, right? Yeah. Are they safe? What needs do they have? Where do I see kind of issues coming up? And then the PT usually can come in pretty quickly and move in from there. And I think they appreciate that. And I know the visit goes better because I've done that. So I think that's kind of what I try to do for a PT. I think that question's a little bit hard for me because I just don't have the perspective of where PTAs were 20 years ago.
Yeah. So let's change it a little bit. So instead of what's changed over the years with regards to how she thinks PTAs have been valued, so in your 2 years experience, how do you feel, have you felt valued by our profession and our organization?
Yes.
If you're to be candid.
Yep. Awesome. I work for a very good organization. So I feel like I'm valued there. And so that makes me, excited about our profession. I think it could be very different if I didn't work for where I work right now. The APTA and it's expensive. I find being a PTA is expensive. I have to have 2 licenses because I'm on the border of Rhode Island and Massachusetts. CEUs, APTA dues. I mean, that stuff just starts to add up. I mean, I think I could spend about $1,000 a year by the time I'm done every year to kind of keep up with everything that I'm supposed to be keeping up with. So that's a lot of money that I'm not reimbursed for. So it's, that part to me, I wish, and I think they have the starter dues and that kind of thing. So I think they know, but it's still not easy to keep up with everything.
Yeah, that's a big debate in our professional organization. I think UpDoc Media has done some things on, what is the value of an APTA membership. I'll have to link to that if I can dig that up. Let's go to the next question. Mandy Chamberlain, and we've kind of hit around this, but she said suggestions on how to create a strong PTA/PT team. And you could throw in CODA/OT or, whatever field that you want to put in. But what are some suggestions on your end? I'll have you answer a question, then I'll give my feedback as well, because nobody wants to hear that, I'm sure. But I wouldn't mind giving the feedback from the PT standpoint. So you first.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to kind of go back to the things that I've been talking about, which is you need to be, as a PTA, you need to be responsible and know that you are representing that person, so it's understanding what's going on in that house, being on top of what changes and things you see, and then communicating that in a timely manner to your PT. You don't want a PT to walk into surprises, unless it's a surprise for both of you. Yeah. But, so if that person was and things change fast, right? Especially because in home care, they're coming home so quickly, they could be a mess on day 1 and they're fine on day 3, or all of a sudden they have a change in status and they were great, a day ago, and all of a sudden you went back for a visit, they're, and it's awful. Like there's some things, this is not right. And so you kind of need to know when to pull a PT in and when to be like, okay, things are okay. And you just communicate that things are okay. So that to me, I think is a big piece. You need to know when you need to bring that PT in and when it's okay to kind of let things go until the supervision visit happens.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I like that. And that creates a lot of trust too. Instantly, with your therapist, when you establish that. I think from my end on suggestions, and this is just speaking from things that I did terribly and made some changes and things, got a lot better, was just providing feedback. You talked about this before, but it's just so easy for me as a home health therapist, starter cares, evals, all this crazy stuff on your schedule, that it's just so easy to kind of push my note to the PT I'm working with instead of like calling them or even shooting them, a text message or an email, giving them some information. But I think the biggest thing for me is whenever, I realized of what I was doing wrong and just not allowing that relationship to grow and that communication line to be open. Just every week checking in, hey, how's so-and-so doing? What should we change? What should we do? Keep doing what you're doing a great job. And then definitely at the reassessments of, being able to show like, hey, you helped this patient, go from this on their tug to this time. Awesome job. Keep doing what just very encouraging. Cause I've been in positions where all I've heard was what I was doing wrong instead of, like encouragement of like, you're doing the right thing, keep at it. And I know whenever I started to focus more on that, things went really well.
I think that's really crucial. Yes, it's nice for people to hear they're doing a good job, but it's really crucial when a PTA is uncertain. So I have had times where I've gone in a house and I've been like, I think I know what to do. I'm not sure. Or, that's it, when that situation changes and you're just, you think, I think I should call the nurse. I think I should call the PT. You start pulling in the resources, but you're not sure if you should. That's really the crucial time for the PT to be like, that was the right call or that wasn't the right call, whatever it is. But when your PTA is unsure of what they just did, that's the crucial time to give them that feedback because they need to hear that. They need to know when it is a crucial time or when it wasn't, or what they did, what's right, or what, it's just, especially in home care, you're by yourself. So you're trying to make these decisions by yourself. So you need the feedback to hear. And so that has been very helpful to me, is when I was like, should I have called you? And they're like, yes or no, whichever the answer was. And the encouragement to say, just call. We'll figure it out if you should or shouldn't afterwards, but at least you call. Don't just keep everything to yourself and think everything's okay.
Yeah. That makes me think of a couple bosses that I've had that have said that same thing, and that made me feel so much better. I never felt like I was pestering them when I knew I probably was, but they never made me feel like it. Right. And they always acknowledged if I didn't know something, they were okay with that. That's a good point. So I want to go way back to your retail days. I think there's a lot of application, from that line of work to what we do. I'm curious to know what were some of the things that you developed or learned in retail that have been most helpful for you in your current job?
The most helpful thing is working with the public.
Yeah.
Which the public is crazy. And
yeah, buddy.
you really never know what you're going to run into.
Mm.
And I think that's something you just have to learn. And you have to do it by experience. You just have to be working with the public. So I've worked with the public for years and had many crazy situations. So there's not many situations that I've walked into for home care that have freaked me out. And I think that's a big issue sometimes with new grads, right? It's very intimidating to walk into someone's house that you don't know and try to work all of a sudden when there's so many things that are you don't even know what door to walk into.
Yeah.
So I think for myself, I kind of had a little bit less of that because I had already worked with the public and I already had worked with people that were strangers to me. And I kind of just it was pretty easy right from the start for me. I didn't have people issues ever because I had just had that in my background.
Yeah. Did you notice any issues with some of your classmates in school?
Oh, yeah.
That don't have that experience?
Yeah. It was awful. It was awful to watch. This is really a job that if you cannot interact with people very well, it is painfully obvious, and I don't know if you can change it. The people that were having a tough time had a tough time. I don't know.
Yeah.
Is it because you're just working with people? That's what you do. I mean, so if you're awkward or not able to work with them and can't put them at ease, it's going to be a rough road.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true. And I don't know about your program, but in my program, there's hardly any students that had been working. Just they went to high school, undergrad, right into PT school. And a lot of us, I mean, I was one of them that didn't have any kind of, practical real world experience in the sense of having a job and interacting with the public. And I can remember my first few clinicals and just like the awkward silences and not knowing what to say or saying the worst things ever, which I still struggle with that. But I mean, now I feel more comfortable, but I think I'm just ignorant of the awkwardness that I bring to the situations. But
we were lucky. We were lucky. I think half of our class, we had 24 students. Half of our class was actually older. So we did have in the class, and the clinical really was where you could see that come out.
Yeah.
You could see it in the practicums, and you kind of knew in our classes who was kind of having an issue with that. But once they got to the clinical, that was really where and a few of them did not, were not able to continue. They just, it just ended up being that it was just too much.
Yeah, we had similar occurrences. And honestly, I think of one of the guests on this podcast, Steven Stockhausen. He was my roommate, but he worked as a teacher in a high school setting, and then he was also a PT tech at an outpatient clinic here in Lexington, Kentucky. And man, the guy he was awesome in his rotations and just interacting with patients, and you could just see his experience just really shine whenever he got in front of people. And then I think about, some of my classmates, myself included, it's just a lot of hard lessons learned, I guess.
Because you have to remember, at the core of what we do is we educate. Yeah, and so if, pull down, you take apart steps, you communicate what those steps are to your patients. So if you have that in your background or you like that, I think this is a natural fit usually for a person who does that.
Yeah, good point. So what are you excited about in physical therapy? Just the direction of our rehab profession.
So here's what I'm working. I expressed an interest to visiting nurses from the start, that I wanted to work with palliative care and hospice patients. So as well as my uncle kind of bringing me into, the therapy field at almost the same time when I was starting PTA school, my grandfather had got really sick and required hospice services. And I had, again, never even known what hospice service was. So it was this weird parallel of, I was in school for physical therapy. At the same time, my family was trying to grapple with my grandfather dying. And there's been this parallel for me. And I could see how important hospice was, and that I felt like there was always a role for physical therapy at that time. And I'm not sure if everybody feels that way or understands what the role exactly is. So because I've expressed that interest, I probably, depending on, can have 25% to 50% of my caseload that are palliative care hospice patients.
Really?
Yeah. And it's interesting because it's a field, part of this field that I don't think is fully developed. And I feel like we are educating both our fields and also the hospice team and the palliative care team, and just trying to work on that. So that has me pretty excited.
Yeah, that I think Kyle Ridgway mentioned that in the hospital readmissions episode. That's something that he's pretty excited about as well, since he's in the ICU. And I've had a few patients that have been on with hospice care. The hospice organization, they did not approve many PT visits, but I got to go in there for a few weeks, and it was very intriguing. It was a very it's just a different environment. I learned a ton. I felt very fortunate to be able to spend time with a patient at that stage of the ball game, if you will. Yeah. But what things stick out to you? If you were to just talk to us about some of the amazing things that you've learned or come across, or Sure. surprises that you've had, like what's it been like?
Okay, so here's some of the things that I know. We have a rehab team, and that team is comprised of, our people, our PTs, OTs, speech, all together. The hospice team is and palliative care team is totally separate. And they are basically nurses, social workers, chaplain, doctor, and maybe a couple other people, and I can't think of who they are. But so it's completely different. It's a completely different team. And what has happened is we've had a few nurses who are champions, or at least understand that physical therapy can play a role.
Okay.
And so they have brought in the PT, and then in some cases, they've brought me as the PTA in. And the similarities is that it's still physical therapy. The person may have a diagnosis that is a terminal diagnosis, but they want to, be in their home, and they still have mobility challenges. They still have equipment needs. They still can do therapeutic exercise, even if they're bed bound. Yeah. I don't find many of the physical therapy interventions very different. What I find different is the framework. So when I'm in the rehab, our total knees and our hips and our deconditioning, I can go in and talk to a person about progress. Yeah. You are going to get better. You're going to be able to get back to your prior function. In my hospice and palliative care work, I cannot have that framework. It doesn't work. I can't talk in the same way about progress. I need to be perfectly fine talking about that they have a terminal illness. I need to talk about that they may not progress, that right now I'm trying to keep them where they are, and that if they do decline, what does that mean? There is still physical therapy work that can happen even when they're in decline. Maybe they're now in a bed. Well, I need to show you how to do bed mobility so that you can have someone dress you, that you can do and pressure ulcers, huge for that population. And I can help that. So to me, I think that's the biggest difference. And there needs to be more research, literature, resources around this so that we as a field kind of understand what our role is, and so that we can then clearly educate the hospice and palliative care teams on what our role is. So I feel like that's why I'm excited about it, because I think it's something that we can really make a difference on, and it's very much needed in the community.
and very fulfilling too, just from, from your standpoint, the clinician standpoint. I know that a lot of my friends, you say the word hospice or palliative care, most clinicians that I've come to know don't necessarily think they would enjoy that, much like home health. But
That's
man,
right.
if people have the opportunity, give it a shot, because it's just such a unique situation to be in.
Yes,
It's
it's
pretty
very
awesome.
similar to what you're saying about it's people saying they never want to do home care. I always have the same thing of people, if I say I want to work with hospice patients, oh, I could never do that. It's too sad, but all these other things. And if that's what you believe, I agree. Don't go into hospice. It's not what you should be doing. But for me, I understand my place. I understand that I can be of help and provide a service. And I'm also okay with understanding the life cycle and understanding that we don't all live forever and that there is a quality of life that people can have.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd rather talk about that and have work on that than ignore it and not have a good quality of life at the end of life. And I think as a society, I think we're slowly starting to get comfortable talking about that. So I think it's an easier time to kind of want to do that work and not be kind of ostracized because you want to do that work.
Yeah. Have you heard the Tim Ferriss interview with the hospice physician by chance?
No. I know of him, but I haven't heard of it.
He interviewed, I'll put a link in the show notes. We interviewed a hospice physician, and this gentleman, I think he's out in San Francisco or somewhere in California. And he has basically a facility that is very just kind of patient centered, just like what would someone want, towards the end of their life. And they have a lot of services. But what I love about that conversation is they really dive deep into what you're just talking about in terms of, the life cycle that, we're all going to die someday, and to not avoid that and ignore it, but to embrace it and to see how that can actually be a blessing for someone like me. I mean, I think of the people that I've treated in hospice. It makes me take a look at my life thinking, okay, like I'm with this person right on their deathbed. That is going to be me someday. Maybe not in hospice, but like I will die. And that makes you reflect and think. And I know for me, outside of the clinical standpoint, it was just very fulfilling. And honestly, I was very fortunate to be able to do that.
If anyone is interested in kind of looking at this work more, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, which she wrote the book On Death and Dying, really is the person that kind of took charge of saying, we shouldn't be ignoring these people, that we actually, and be afraid of it, that we actually should talk to them and find out, are they scared? What are they trying to, do at the end of their life? And so she, I think her work is probably what I started with and kind of put a framework for me to understand that there is work that can be done there and that there is this difference in a quality of life at the end of life. So if anybody, that's where I would start. And then Compassion and Choices website is another play in the National Organization for Hospice and Palliative Care. These are organizations that, some of them are doing right to die kind of legislation and things like that, but they definitely are the resources I go to kind of understand more of, what I'm trying to do and where we are as a society right now.
Okay. And I'll put links to that in the show notes.
Okay.
What are you most discouraged about right now in the PT profession? Anything frustrating or you have a grim outlook on?
I love my job, so it's kind of hard for me to pick, anything in particular that I have, that I am having. I think things are changing. I think that we are sicker as a society, and that saddens me. I think, I watch how many I'm going to say like about 90% of my hospice patients are cancer patients. With, I don't like seeing suffering. I don't like watching, COPD. I don't understand how you can be a smoker. Those things, like the things that we're doing that we have choices about, that I see what happens at the end. It's kind of hard. That saddens me to see that we kind of are willingly making these decisions that I know are going to end up in this way. And that is discouraging. And I'm not sure how we're just doing it in mass quantities right now. And that scares me. That does. Mm-hmm. So the job itself, I love. I don't have any, are there small things, tough days? Yes. But I think overall kind of where we're going with our health is probably more what I'm very scared and discouraged about. Yeah.
Yeah. The trends are not looking that great when I think of the masses. Yeah. And I know for some people have listened to this may not completely grasp the weight of some of, these kind of chronic metabolic diseases. I know they've reached, almost every corner of our country for sure. But where I am in central Kentucky, portions of eastern Kentucky, just and where I grew up, West Virginia, where I was in Ohio. I mean, just those areas, the impact just the majority of the people that we see are heavily impacted by those lifestyle diseases. And it can be kind of discouraging, and the trends are not getting any better in this area, at least.
And we're on the front lines. So we see it, and not only we're on the front lines. So not only do we kind of know it, but we see the ramifications of it, right? I mean, it's not just this crazy off thing that we're like, oh, a lot of people are, obesity. Oh, isn't that awful? No, I literally see people who can't get up off their chair because they're too loud. You know what I mean? Like that's just, or the smoking thing. Like I see people who literally are suffocating at the end of their lives because they have no lung capacity left. Like that kind of, I just think it's in our face more. So it just doesn't compute to me that people can't quite see the tragedy that we're kind of, seem to be doing to ourselves. So I just think it hits us harder than it does other people.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Well, let's transition. I want to ask you some quick questions. I want to be respectful of your time.
Okay.
Answers don't have to be quick. You know how the drill works, right?
Yes.
All right. If you could go back and talk to your 25-year-old self, what would you tell the 25-year-old Christine?
So I thought about this one. Here's what I wrote down. This is to myself. You can't imagine how your life and the world will change in your own lifetime, but your inner self and your values will always stay true. So trust them and let them guide you.
I love that.
I mean, things changed. You're talking, I'm an 80s child. I mean, half the things that we have in around the world we're not even thought of yet. So I can't imagine in the next 20, 40 years what this world is going to look like. But I myself, as Christine Cabral, will be exactly the same.
I love that. Yeah, lots of changes. You mentioned the 80s. That makes me think of one of my earliest memories was talking with my grandmother. She was in Ghana, Africa. And we had to go to the local, it was like a real estate agent, the only person that had like international dialing. And it was Christmas Eve. We drove over there like 8:00 at night, and we all sat around this old telephone and called my grandmother. And there was, about a 6 or 7 second delay in communicating with her. And then just to think of right now, we are watching each other on a YouTube live stream instantaneously. Granted, you're only in Rhode Island and I'm in Kentucky, but it would not be that different if you were in China right now. And to think of, I mean, that's insane, absolutely insane. And it's just going to, keep getting crazier and crazier. But I like what you say. If you, stay true to your values and yourself, then that's what's most important. All right. So next question, continuing education. what's been some of the most helpful for you in your work as a home health PTA?
This is an area that I think I probably need to work more on. I think that I am so close to being out of school that I still rely a lot on school, and I need to start to expand more. One of the things that we're talking about at Visiting Nurses, we have probably about 10 to 15 PTAs that, we don't have time to talk to each other. So what I'm hoping is that they'll pay for us to come in and do like a continuing ed, an exchange. Here's what I do with my patients for balance. What do you do for Therex? What do you do for ambulation? And just do an exchange of ideas.
Awesome.
That to me would probably be the most helpful. Do I want to go to a lot of continuing eds and, everything else? Yes. Do I have the money to right now? No. So I kind of want to try to do the practical first and then go to other things if I can.
Yeah. I felt that lull after school as well. Still kind of in it. So you mentioned, those books, some of the resources that really helped you in just kind of having a different view of hospice and different view of your practice. What other resources similar to that have influenced you as a PTA? Have you come across anything else outside of that kind of hospice palliative care realm that's really influenced you in your practice?
I do like the APTA website, and their resources. I do think that they have amazing things there. So I will go there. So I'm a Pinterest girl. So I will go on and, there are a lot of just exercises, and exercise sheets that are out there. So on that site. So I will. Yeah, definitely. You could put in anything, knees, hips, anything, and they'll have, things there. So I have kind of folders set up that I just kind of put different things in there all the time. So that's a big one for me.
Awesome. I'll have to get on that. I've not ventured in that realm as of yet. Okay, well let's wrap up. My favorite question. Let's say we're at CSM. You've got every geriatric rehab clinician in the room. What are you going to tell them? What do you want them to know?
One of the pieces of advice that I got early on was to treat your patients as if they're your own grandparents. Mm-hmm. And if you think of them, and more so it's like abstract, but when I leave that house, it helps me to figure out if I need to do more. So if that was my grandmother in my house, in that house, and I was kind of, I wasn't sure how she was feeling or if I should do something, that helps me to gauge like, okay, if that was my grandmother, I'm concerned about her. I need to call the nurse. I need to call someone and make sure everything's okay. So I really think that's a piece of advice that people need to think about. I like to focus on safety, big time when I go into a house. I think that people, when they're in the hospital or they're in the rehab, they have so many people around them. And then all of a sudden they go back to their house and it's like, oh crap, I'm by myself. And I have no idea what to do. I've forgotten everything anyone's ever told me. I'm in total panic mode, right? So to me, it's always like calm, safety, and give them a couple of steps. And if that's all good, it'll be fine. The rest will come. I don't, so I know you love talking about pushing patients and giving them their kettlebells and all that. And yes, I think there's a place for that, but I really think that, at least for my work in home care, that I am more focused on safety and making sure that they have what they need in terms of, it's equipment and what's in their house and kind of what they're doing above anything else.
Yeah. I would agree with that 100%. I've definitely, that's been another hard lesson learned in home health, because you're right. They come home and they're so close to having something very, very, very bad happen to them in that home setting. And it can be so unpredictable. I think that's a challenge for a lot of people coming into home health, especially if they haven't been in that world and they come from like an outpatient ortho background where it is about, push, challenge your patient, which, we need to do, like you mentioned, but yeah, safety is huge. And I'm definitely, I don't want to say I'm getting softer on my patients, but I guess I'm more selective on challenging them for sure.
Yeah. I want to frame that differently because you've talked many podcasts about pushing. And here's what I think that framework needs to be different. It's not about, because I feel like it's blaming the PT or the PTA for being soft on the patient. And I really don't think that's what happens. I think that it's more about where, the critical thinking piece of where is that patient? Do they need to be pushed right now? And how do they need to be pushed? Sometimes I push about safety. I have the little old woman who decides she doesn't really need that walker. Well, yes, she does. And I need to show her why she needs it and what will happen if she doesn't use it, right? Like that is a push. Sometimes it's a push and you need to get up off that chair and stop watching TV 20 hours a day. You know what I mean? Like there's different things and it's not just, I need to get you to do these more exercises and I need you to push harder. I think that there's a lot of different pushes that PTs need to do, and it's not always Therex. That's my 2 cents on that. Sometimes it's Therex, but I really don't think my experience so far is that it's really not about Therex, that it's more about different. It just depends on the person.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's about mobility. Sometimes it's about equipment. Sometimes it's about their family and what their family is, how that's influencing the whole dynamic, which is different in a home care setting versus outpatient and all these other settings. I definitely have had my patients where I come to the house and the mobility status has changed. And I have the, little old woman who's trying to pick up her husband from the bed. Like, what? No, what is going on? Right? Like that's the kind of stuff that I think we run into more than kettlebells.
Yeah. And I guess I should be clear that the percentage of people that I use kettlebells with is probably 10 to 15% of my caseload, which I have been pretty loud in that regard. I think I don't disagree with you one bit on what you just said in terms of, knowing where to push. I guess just from my observations, I've been around many people where I don't think it's that thoughtful to where when they are doing Therex and they feel like Therex is needed to where they just haven't pushed them to a therapeutic level, to where they actually will adapt. So I think that's my big beef, which I could probably communicate that a little better, but I mean, you do hit the nail right on the head. Sometimes Therex and deadlifts and squats is not a priority at all. And, if anyone spent a day with me, they would see the same thing. Like today, I mean, I had 2 patients to where, they were completely convinced that they were fine with their single point cane and would not use their, front wheeled walker and, almost fell twice. Right. And yeah, so that's the common day. So I'm glad you brought up that point.
Right. Here's what I'll always tell my patients is that I will never stand in their way of their progress. Right. So as soon as they want to, if I think they're ready to do more Therex, whatever it is, we're going to do it. Right. But I'm not, they have to want to do that. So it's our job just to be ready when they're ready and to know what that is. Right. What's the next step? They're ready to take it. Great. Let's go. If they've been doing seated exercises and I think they're ready to start standing, great. We're going to start standing. If I think they can use some weight or some bands, whatever it is, let's go. Right. But I just don't think it's automatically the answer. I just think that it fits certain places.
Yep. It's our job to recommend it to the right people at the right time. Yep. So, all right, Christine, thank you for your time. It's great to meet you on this YouTube live video stream and talk with you. That's one of the cool things about this is just interacting with these people in like the Facebook group, and then you finally get to meet them, whether you just talk to them, over the internet or, over a live stream or whatever. So I really appreciate it. I thank you for your perspective on, just the PTA PT relationship, sharing your experience in the hospice realm and just how you view, treating your patients. So I know a lot of people will get a lot from this, myself included. If people want to ask you any questions, is the Facebook group a good place to do that?
Sure.
Okay. So in the Senior Rehab Project Facebook group, if you're not in it, go to seniorrehabproject.com and you can find a link that will say join on the homepage, and you can get in that group and and just introduce yourself and ask some questions, because that's how Christy and I connected, and it's been awesome. It's been just really helpful for me as a clinician. I know you said the same thing at the beginning. So once again, thank you for your time, and you have a lovely evening.
You too. Thank you.
All right. Hit me. Thank you for listening to the Senior Rehab Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, you should hop on over to seniorrehabproject.com to find more helpful content. You can also find out how you can join the team and be a part of the private Facebook group, the monthly mastermind meetup, and have a say in the content and direction of this podcast. Once again, that's seniorrehabproject.com. I appreciate you, and I'll talk with you soon. But in the meantime, do not forget to stay funky.